Welcome back. So this week, we're looking at an interview transcript about a really unique legal maneuver by Mordechai David. He used human-sized dummies to block a journalist while staying just outside a restraining order's 2-meter limit.
I have to say, just kicking things off, the ingenuity here is, it's something to admire if you just put the politics aside for 1 second.
Right.
From a purely strategic view, this dolls maneuver, it's kind of a masterclass in exploiting a legal gray area.
It really is.
It follows the letter of the law, that 2-meter distance, perfectly, but it just completely guts the spirit of the injunction.
It's so theatrical, which is why it works, why it gets attention. And I think what makes it even smarter is how proactive it is.
How so?
Well, the note in the transcript about waiting for ruling on the dolls, he knows he's in a loophole. He's basically daring the judiciary to catch up and close it.
That shows a real sophistication, absolutely. A discipline even. But, and this is a big but, that strength is almost immediately undermined by what comes next.
Okay.
And that, I think, brings us to our first major point for improvement. It's about consistency, really, rhetorical focus.
The strategic use of the dolls, this very clever legal move, loses all its rhetorical power when it's immediately equated with these totally unrelated, large-scale political grievances.
Exactly. That's the weakness right there.
You see this repeated pivot, right? It's defensive. He has this unique, almost surgical legal challenge, blocking one guy with a car and 2 puppets.
Yeah, it's very specific.
And then he immediately jumps to talking about, blocking 1 million elderly people on the Ion Highway? That comparison, it just feels like such a distraction.
It's a classic rhetorical misstep. I mean, you've hooked the reader on this fascinating, specific detail, the 2-meter rule, the demuyot, the precision of it all.
Right.
And then the argument just swerves from, look at my clever, court-compliant action to, well, other people do much bigger, badder things, so why pick on me? It cheapens the whole maneuver.
It really does. It's like you're trading this really sharp intellectual point for a kind of generic political complaint.
You're swapping a scalpel for a sledgehammer. And the discipline it takes to stay focused on the novelty, on the legal challenge itself, that's what would make this so powerful.
So the suggestion here is pretty clear then.
I think so. You have to strengthen the material by focusing the entire narrative weight, at first, just on the novelty of the legal defiance. This is a story about a challenge to a court order, period.
Okay, but what if the comparison is, essential to the politics of it?
Then you have to shift the argument. You move it away from scale and towards precedent. We stop talking about one person versus 1 million.
And instead, we talk about whether this type of action is being treated differently.
Exactly. So how do we make that actionable? How do we structure that?
I think you can structure the defense in, say, 3 steps. First, you establish the cleverness, the dolls, the circumvention of the court order's wording.
Okay.
Second, you establish the legality, hammering home the point about the 2-meter distance being maintained, no matter how absurd it looks.
And third.
And only then, if you must make the political point, you focus it on principle.
Can you give me a concrete example of that? How do you pivot away from the Ion Highway analogy?
Well, instead of that, you could frame it like this. The court order is about distance. The only argument against this maneuver is that it violates the spirit of the law.
Okay, I'm with you.
So if the courts tolerate other forms of political obstruction that also play with the letter of the law, like, say, procedural delays in court or protest permits that are designed to cause disruption, why is this specific, nonviolent, court-compliant act being singled out?
Ah, I see. So you're not complaining about other protests being allowed, you're making it about judicial hypocrisy.
Exactly.
The whole spirit versus letter debate, that keeps the argument on the intellectual high ground and focused on the legal loophole, which is the strongest part of the whole thing.
Right. If you make it about scale, you've already lost the tactical win.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the reason for the block in the first place, the justification? I think that leads us to the second point, which is more about structure and flow.
Right.
The key justifications for targeting this journalist are just sort of dropped in as isolated rhetorical questions, and that really weakens the whole defensive narrative.
The weakness here is almost purely structural, isn't it? I mean, the reason he's targeting the journalist is this incredibly serious accusation.
The one about the videos contributing to anti-Semitism and the terror attack in Australia.
Yeah, but it's just thrown in there. It's so abrupt. Almost casual. It's not treated as the core moral engine that's driving this entire operation.
And the problem there is that the action, The dolls is so detailed and so strategic, it's clearly been thought through. So if the subject truly believes the journalist's work is causing that kind of harm,
Then the blocking isn't just a petty annoyance anymore.
exactly, it becomes a principled defensive measure. But by burying the motive like that, it makes the whole thing look like harassment first, with this very serious justification just kind of tacked on as an afterthought.
It's a hierarchy problem. The motive needs to be the premise. The action should be the conclusion that logically follows.
So the suggestion is you have to establish the claimed negative impact of the journalist's work before you get into the details of the block. The dolls should seem like a direct, proportionate response to that alleged incite.
That's a big revision, though, because if you lead with an accusation that heavy, linking reporting to global terror, you risk turning off an audience that might have otherwise been fascinated by the legal cleverness.
That's a fair point. It does set the credibility bar very high right from the start.
It does. But, if the goal is to be taken seriously, you have to meet that bar. The way it's presented now makes the action seem reactive, like a tantrum against a court order, not a principled stand. We have to flip that.
So concretely, what does that look like? How do you make that shift?
You just move the statement of motive way, way up in the flow. Instead of that isolated question, do you think videos like yours contribute to this? You state the conviction first.
And frame the action as the solution. So how would that conviction sound?
It needs to be direct. Something like, given the reports about the alleged actions of IDF soldiers amplified by this specific coverage and the clear rise in online anti-Semitism that followed, a surgical intervention to limit the spread of that reporting was deemed necessary and proportionate.
I see. That framing immediately positions the subject as acting from a place of serious, principled grievance.
Right.
And the dolls, the 2-meter rule, that cleverness then becomes the precise tool used to solve that stated problem. It's not just a stunt.
It transforms the action from a gimmick into a defense. It gives the entire thing a kind of gravitas it's currently lacking. The action itself becomes evidence of the seriousness of the motive.
Which brings us, I think, to our final point. And this one really gets to the heart of the subject's ability to persuade anyone who isn't already in their camp. It's about tone.
The reliance on these sweeping, generalizing labels for opponents just undermines the subject's credibility, especially when you're talking about complex legal and political issues.
Yes, we see it throughout the material.
It's a consistent pattern. These broad inflammatory labels, Channel 12 liars, the most extreme leftists, and that really derogatory description of a judge as a waiter judge.
The male star show-fed.
Right. When you're trying to make a serious institutional critique, jumping straight to personal attacks like that is it's so counterproductive.
It is fundamentally alienating to anyone neutral, anyone on the fence. You're basically asking the audience to just trust your character judgment, to believe they are liars or extreme without providing any factual proof.
And in a legal argument where precision is everything, that's incredibly weak. Citing a biased action is always stronger than just using a biased label. It makes the whole critique feel loud instead of, researched.
And you have to ask what the goal is. If the goal is just to fire up your base, sure, those labels work. They're effective shorthand.
But if the goal is to persuade a judge or the media or the public, that shorthand becomes a huge liability.
So the suggestion has to be to replace all of those hyperbolic labels with specific, factual examples of the bias you're alleging. Use the evidence. Let the facts do the work, not the epithets.
Let's use the example from the transcript, the one about the Supreme Court event. It's not enough to just name the people there as extreme leftists or dismiss a judge because of a job he might have had decades ago. That's just noise.
It is. It focuses all the attention on the person, not the policy or the potential conflict of interest, which is the actual issue.
Right. So the more effective way to do it would be to detail the specifics of the controversy.
So instead of just naming names?
Exactly. You talk about the nature of the event itself. You could say, for example, that it involved organizations like B'Tselem and Shovrim Shtika, and then you briefly reference the specific policies or rulings they're known for opposing.
Ah, so the focus shifts to the institutional conflict.
Yes.
It lets you pivot the critique. It's no longer a personal jab about a judge's past. It's a legitimate question about whether a sitting judge should be at an event hosted by partisan organizations that he might have to rule on later.
And that specificity, that level of detail, provides actual objective support for the claim that these things warrant scrutiny.
It preserves the seriousness that we've been talking about this whole time. The sophistication of the Dole's maneuver demands an equally sophisticated rhetoric to back it up. If the action is surgical, the language has to be surgical too.
Absolutely. It's about building a case, not just venting frustration.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. Let's recap the 3 big takeaways for the revision.
Right. First, refocus the narrative. Prioritize the unique legal maneuver, the dolls, the 2-meter rule, over these broad political comparisons. The high ground here is legal creativity, not just adding to the political noise.
Second, fix the structure. You have to assert the motive, the claimed harm from the journalist's work, much, much earlier. The action needs to feel like a logical, principled response, not just a random tactical decision.
And finally, boost credibility by getting rid of the broad inflammatory labels. Replace them with specific factual citations of the actions or events that are actually controversial. Let the facts make the argument for you.
The core of this material, the central action, is genuinely compelling. It's a genius legal move. The narrative that surrounds it just needs to match that level of genius. We'd strongly encourage you to implement these shifts, revise the material, and send it back to us. We would love to see the result.